So with that introduction, I would like to now shift and bring up one of our very special guests. So we have here with us today Cisco's Chief Strategy Officer, Anuj Kapoor, who's going to join me for a conversation to talk about the role that AppDynamics and applications play in Cisco's broader strategy. Anuj, you want to come on up?
Thanks. How are you? I'm well. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah. Welcome.
So we've been talking about applications, or at least I've been talking about applications. What's your favorite application? What do you rely on?
It's a tough one. I actually have two. One is LastPass, which is a password manager that I use. And then there's another application which I find more interesting that I use to keep track of our customers and competitors, and you may have heard of it. It's called TMZ.
Right, that's where all our customers are there.
It's a watering hole for the influencers, and I'd be remiss if I didn't do.
So what do you do when LastPass and TMZ aren't working? How do you function?
I mean, just life falls apart, and pharmaceutical products help to get through the day. But no, I mean, it's interesting. I think Chuck talked about the stat that when you wake up, I think 60% of the people reach for their digital device to see what's going on. I'm just wondering, what do the other 40% do?
Exactly. They're non-functional lying in bed, I guess.
Yeah, or they sleep with their fax machine.
Yeah. Right, exactly. So one of the things that Chuck also spoke to a little bit was these new customer promises that Cisco has rolled out. And the very first one of those is around reimagining your applications, which I think for a lot of people is probably not what they're used to hearing from Cisco, is that Cisco's sort of first starting point is reimagining your applications. You want to maybe sort of share a perspective on sort of how that came to be and why that's our first promise?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in some ways, Cisco has always been in the application business. Mm-hmm. And I made this comment to a number of analysts this morning, which is we build infrastructure for two environments: the application-facing environment and the user-facing environment. And this is a user-facing environment, right? We have users. And in some ways, the job of the infrastructure is to provide users secure access to both data and applications.
Right.
So synthetically, for the last 25 years, application centricity has been a core of what Cisco has done. Mm-hmm. But I think as we started to listen to our customers and as we started to engage with them more meaningfully around exactly what their problem statements were, mm-hmm. It was very clear that, you know, the things that we talk about, application loyalty is the new brand loyalty. Your application is your business, and application uptime is effectively the only KPI that matters. It was very important for us to partner with them on the challenge that they felt was of most importance to them.
Yep.
And not only do it in a way that talked about the application as the atomic unit that they care about, but to be able to link to the downstream problem statements of ensuring that the application and the infrastructure and changes in either were more tightly coordinated.
Right, exactly. That up and down the stack, they're actually more and more connected to each other.
That's right.
Yeah, makes total sense. So one of the things I know you do in your role is you go out and spend time in the market, talking to customers, talking to partners, speaking at events. You obviously get a lot of feedback, and I know you've been one of the big champions of the central nervous system vision that we share with Cisco and AppDynamics. You want to maybe share a little bit of how it's resonating, what feedback you're hearing?
Yeah, I mean, you know, the motivation for us thinking about CNS was actually very simple. And I like to use a personal analogy as just to help, which is if you showed up in an emergency room at 3 in the morning, this is what you don't want to see. You don't want to see 10 different doctors that speak 10 different languages, each having a tenth of the information they need to be able to do a diagnosis, more importantly, to be able to do a remediation. So that's fundamentally what we saw in the IT environment, which is the siloed operations and the single sources of truth were effectively impeding decision flow. And depending on sort of what your comedic stance is, there's a phrase called mean time to blame or mean time to innocence, which is how long does it take for me to figure out that I'm actually not responsible so I can breathe. But that ultimately doesn't help the customer with regards to the application experience. So I think increasingly we needed to redefine our view of what it takes to do a very simple KPI, which we increasingly believe a lot of CIOs will measure themselves by 5 years from now, and even today, is my application up?
Right.
And a very simple KPI and a very simple statement in and of itself is underpinned with a level of complexity that is frankly overwhelming the agility that our customers seek to drive. So being able to link the application and the infrastructure tiers to be able to make sure that as one changes, the other changes in a more coordinated manner, in a more predictable manner, and when things fail, to be able to compress the time when time truly matters, to be able to drive root cause remediation in a way that's automated, that's the vision of the CF.
Right, so then applying the AI, the ML technologies to help the human operator make sense of all that complexity derive the insights, and then drive the actions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The joke we have is AI is really assisted intelligence.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the other things that we've obviously been working on at AppDynamics and with Cisco is, to the point of what we've been discussing, figuring out technically how do we actually stitch together these data sets across what I tend to refer to as the different data domains, right? We have the business domain with the business IQ data. We have the end user experience domain with the experience journey map that we'll talk more about at the event. We have the application domain on the back end with what we call the business transaction. And then we have the layers of infrastructure that you were referring to, obviously, with compute, with network, and then the security wrapper that's put all around it. And so we've done things there where we've now begun to connect things like the Intersight Workload Optimizer, the ACI Network Fabric, connected with AppDynamics. One of the things that I think people may be wondering is, hey, in a world where things are going to the cloud and there's so much talk about the cloud, why does it matter to connect to that kind of infrastructure instead of just going all in on the cloud?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very valid point. And, you know, the question I always ask our customers is, look, your applications may live in the cloud, but it's unlikely that your users do. And, you know, unless Keanu Reeves is going to walk in and we're all in like some matrix and actually not in the real world, I think for the next foreseeable future, the users that you need to actually access the applications and the data will ultimately not live in an availability zone. So the on-prem infrastructure across at least the top 20,000 organizations that I think AppDynamics uses as a frame of reference, they still are dealing with the migration and the portability of legacy infrastructure that runs their systems of engagement and systems of records. And there's really an economic cost involved in terms of replatforming those systems to a modern and cloud era. And what most customers are telling us is, while cloud gives them phenomenal agility that they want to embrace, a lot of the data sets that they need and a lot of the core infrastructure components still reside on-prem. So the world to them is hybrid, and what they need is a performance framework that helps them instrument what they care about, which is principally the application and application experience for success in a world that increasingly is hybrid, distributed, and more importantly, heterogeneous. By that, we mean multi-cloud. So that becomes sort of the problem statement of the hour, which is it's not a single cloud, it's multiple cloud.
Right.
It's not just all cloud, it's on-prem. And it's not just single vendor, it's multi-vendor. So dealing with that fabric and dealing with that complexity and competing against vendors that have no install base, no legacy, no fear, that's the challenge of the hour for them.
Exactly. So being able to connect the public cloud telemetry with things that are private cloud and traditional architectures that are on-premise all into one system then becomes very powerful.
That's correct.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you for being here this morning. Yeah, thank you.